So I think leadership for me is all about listening.
For families that are working across multiple markets and institutions, fragmentation can be quite stressful.
I think, look, taking the bad news and going to clients is important. Because if you try to sugarcoat or hide when things are not going very well, guess what? When things come back, no one's going to be standing for you. And that's the reality. You can have all the strategy in the world. It looks great on paper. Everyone really bites and everyone thinks it's the best. But the slip between the cup and the lip is between creating the strategy and executing.
Across the Middle East, wealth is growing fast, but the advisory landscape hasn't always kept pace with the complexity of modern family needs. More clients are finding themselves juggling multiple platforms, institutions, and advisors without anyone truly connecting the dots. Today, I'm joined by someone building a firm specifically for that reality. I'm speaking with Kunal Varma, Chairman and CEO of InvestGate Private Wealth, which was created to bring international-grade advisory together with regional understanding and deliver something closer to a wealth concierge model for sophisticated families. Kunal, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lara, thank you so much for having me here.
Where I really wanted to start is I would love to know from you what personal experiences have shaped the way that you think about wealth, trust, or financial guidance.
Look, I've been, working in the financial services industry for a better part of my life, nearly 25 years. Okay. And I've worked through various jurisdictions, which has given me a lot of insight on what customers want, what they're looking for, and how they've tried to structure their wealth and their estate planning. What has really come to life is that if you look at the traditional way where the banks operate, it is extremely hierarchical and they're not as nimble. And customers today are looking for services and solutions that actually match their need and quickly. I think that's one. I think the other angle around the trust piece that you just spoke about, it is products and solutions are extremely commoditized. Everyone is offering similar asset classes, similar products. But the reality is, if you want to move away from a commodity driven market, you need to work on the trust element. And the trust element doesn't come overnight. It comes through being conscientious, it comes through being thoughtful, and it comes through being structured with a strong execution plan. And I think those elements have really defined in terms of how and what customers are really looking for. I usually say this, Lara, and I don't mean it as a joke, but the region is getting very easy to live in. But the complexity of how to manage the wealth around these clients is getting extremely, extremely difficult because you have customers coming in from all over the world wanting to come to the UAE more so, and then the Middle East, as the wider region, and they're coming from different jurisdictions. So there is an element of complication. And I think decluttering that complication and keeping it simple and easy is the way to really go after this.
Absolutely. I'm curious to know, when you speak about these experiences that you've had, how do you believe it's really shaped the type of leader that you are today?
Look, I think, leadership, in that sense, if you really think about it, it's about listening. And if you can listen attentively, there will be a lot that you will uncover. And for me, it's always been about truly listening and speaking to clients when and what will really matter to them, right? It is not about just going in with a solution or going in with a product that would typically give us incentive, but not really meet the need of the client. So I think leadership for me is all about listening, was about resilience. I worked in India, I worked in Dubai, I worked in Bahrain, I worked in the UK. So done a little bit of everything and been a core financial services guy. And that calls for resilience. So in addition to listening to people, you got to have an internal resilience. And then your compass, your moral compass needs to be really, really aligned, I believe. And that's been my mantra, really, and very simply, that if it's right for me, it should ideally be right for the client. And if it can be simplified further so that it really resonates, I think then the job's done. And that's for me is leadership in very simple terms.
And when you're making those difficult decisions today, what principle or lesson do you find that you come back to the most?
I think I'll go back to the moral compass here, Lara. I think, if it's right for you, then it's right for the client. It should be right, or you should do right when nobody is looking. And you should ideally take on tougher paths and solve for tougher things because the outcomes will be much greater and far more rewarding. So I think these couple of lessons really, come together. And, talking about customers, I mean, customers are simple, Lara. Customers are simple. Their needs have become complex because of the globalization in the world that's coming through, right?
Mm.
And I think if you can very simply, in a decluttered manner, bring that to life for the customer and not just talk about one need which is linked to how they will place their money in markets or across asset classes, but also give them a holistic, far more integrated view of their liquidity, their risks, and their future goals. I think that's the way to really address that. That
Mm.
would be the way I would really say, uh, you know, going back to your question, yeah, that's how I would really define it.
Yes. And for leaders that are listening to this conversation who find it challenging to block out that noise that you just spoke to, how have you been able to cultivate that focus on what the main thing is that you're setting out to do, despite all that noise and despite that clutter?
I think it's a good one, right? Because look, I think everyone wants to keep it simple, but unfortunately, when you get caught up in bigger institution organizations, you try to do exactly how and what the roadmap has been drawn. So I think for me, even through my professional journey, I remember be direct, be frank, say what's in your mind, and just be very, very open about it and be extremely open to getting feedback, because that's where leaders somewhere get it wrong. Because if they go into a tizzy about, I was given this feedback and it's not resonated well with me and I think I need to go back and I don't think it's about that. And the last 25 years have shown me that it is not about that. It is about the larger good. It is about the true north. You got to keep your focus on, and you really need to go after what really matters. You can't do everything for everyone, and that's the reality. And you got to pick the wins that you believe and back yourself up and focus on the true north. And if you can do that objectively, day in, day out, and execute to that theme, people will be in a far better place. I'm nobody to give a lot of, I don't know, insight about this, but I think if you really think about it simply, and I keep using this word simple because the world is complex. So if you're going to be in a complex world and try to overcomplicate things, you're not going to be able to execute. And if you're not going to be able to execute, you're not going to be able to get the best piece going up. So keep it simple, follow the true north, keep yourself aligned, and do the right thing when people aren't looking. And I think if you can put some of these things together, make for a good leader, I guess. And it's worked for me, so I guess it should work for the others as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. I would love to shift the focus to InvestGate. Take us back to the beginning. What was the problem that you saw in the marketplace that made you stop and say, we need to build this company?
So, Laura, I think, look, 25 years, multiple jurisdictions, and only been doing wealth management and talking to clients, understanding their problems. And as we spoke to clients, what I'd realized through the journey was clients were getting extremely worried in terms of how the banks were operating. Is it too bureaucratic? Is it too driven by incentive? Why is the process not simpler? And on the other side, you would see banks saying, we don't want this format of a client, or we want a client who would give us more income, and so on and so forth. I think once I really started seeing this, and the irony of this was it wasn't an issue highlighted by customers who were in Dubai. It was in Dubai, in India, in Bahrain, in the UK, everywhere. The baseline was same, that it is getting too complex. We're using too many jargons. I have simple needs and I want to be able to address those needs. And for some reason, the requirements that were being laid out by the clients, I'm not saying they were not being matched off by the institutions, but they were not completely and independently being matched off by the institutions. And that's where the thought of InvestGate came to us. It's a gateway to your investment needs. It's not squarely focused on just placing money in markets and giving you diversification, but it goes beyond. It gives you access to your debt, liquidity, risk management, and your future goals. And I think when we built InvestGate, one thing we were very clear on, Lara, it's not about differentiation. It was about distinction. And there is a difference between the two. And the word distinction, if you really deep dive into that, it was about how do you really understand the entire ecosystem and the needs of the client? How do you really communicate to those needs of that client, which is simple, easy, palatable? And how do you really execute to the needs of the client? Because the model that InvestGate is embarked on is a very established model in the West. The US is extremely bubbling on the external asset management front, and so is Singapore. And Dubai is really gaining momentum as you see a lot of these millionaires come in, right? I was taking stock, Lara, and last year there are different numbers that are being quoted. It was said 9,800 millionaires came into the UAE. And if you really backward work that math, that's 30 millionaires a day. So the view for InvestGate was it is not differentiation, it's distinction. And there were three gaps that InvestGate was looking to really solve. If it was a gap conversation, there was three gaps. It was wealth versus advice. So wealth is growing at a much faster clip, but the advice penetration and the understanding of what advice needs to be provided was not growing at that clip. The other one was around complexity. I said the world is getting global, people are making new homes, and the Middle East is becoming a very easy place to live in, but a very difficult place for planning. And that was the gap that we wanted to address. And the third one was the governance gap. You know, there is a lot of movement of wealth that is happening, which we call the great transfer. This is happening from the first generation to the second generation. And the views for Gen X, millennials, is very, very different to how their parents really structured wealth and so on, right? So I think differentiation was not the issue. It was distinction in how we look, how we communicate, how we advise. And advice was around the three gaps that we really identified. And that's what we're really going after.
Yes. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on further with you that you mentioned around planning. And for families that are working across multiple markets and institutions, fragmentation can be quite stressful. And I'm wondering, how does InvestGate act as that human aggregator for clients? How do you bring that simplification that you were talking about? What does that look like in practice?
Well, look, I think it's a great question, Lara. And we keep talking about globalization. I've spoken about it during our conversation as well. Now, if you really think about it, cross border would mean, so we got to peel this onion a little bit, right? If you really think about it, cross border is people migrating from different parts of the world and finding a home in the Middle East, more so the UAE, and then looking at other markets like Saudi and so on and so forth, right? Because that's where there is immense action happening, immense wealth growth, immense opportunity. Now, when it comes to us, our view is very, very simple, like I said, and the focus that we are bringing to our clients is around one, wealth advisory, which means we help you connect to different jurisdictions through the partner and custodian banks that we have. And we can give you access sitting in your home country, which may be the UAE, into Switzerland, Singapore, or Europe. It allows you diversification of your asset in different jurisdictions. That's one way. The other way, which is, if you look at most of the wealth advisory outfits, they are more or less focused on deploying and creating diversification, which is important, I believe, but they don't go beyond that. And what we are looking to do beyond that is, if you think about debt and you're sitting in Dubai and you want to buy property sitting in Dubai, in London, because you believe that's a great opportunity with where the market is, or you want to invest in Dubai per se, or you want to buy asset in Singapore, InvestGate sits there in the middle. Through the partners that we have, we can facilitate an end-to-end transaction for our clients on that piece. You come in and you have complex needs where there is a transfer of wealth happening between the first generation going to the second generation, and you want to really create the rail guards for your second generation so that the wealth is not destroyed but it's protected. We help with trust services. So we create foundations, trust services, and create trust for our clients. And these trust structures can either be through the UAE foundations in DIFC or through Guernsey, Jersey, BVI, where we help really place all assets there and structure the wealth division in a very, very apt and concise manner for our clients, right? I want us to be the outsourced CIO office, or like you just said, Lara, a wealth concierge for our clients. So it's just not about how we will deploy asset and get multi-jurisdictional advantage for clients, but it is how we can simply bring everything under one roof and through our value proposition, really touch on all those needs and provide the client that experience and the simplicity that they really require in their life, in their very complex life. Let me put it that way.
When you think about the future of wealth advisory, it is changing rapidly, and there's new technology, there's different client expectations, as you've touched on, there's these new investment opportunities. What do you believe the industry will look like over the next decade?
Look, I think it's going through a marked shift, like you just said. It's getting tech enabled, it's getting AI enabled, and I think there is major disruption now. That technology and AI disruption is not just in the wealth management industry, it's across the board. But what is happening with this tech and digital investments that are happening in this world, a lot of people are taking on and investing in markets. You hear, Lara, all the time, there are new millionaires that have been created investing in crypto asset. There are new millionaires who have been created by investing in real estate asset in markets that have really done well or grown over the past. So I think the landscape is going through a major disruption. I think 10 years out, Lara, it's going to be the first point conversation that we had. How simple is that algorithm or that tech that is being, that the client is consuming so that they understand how and what to do? I think the second disruption that's going to come through is a lot of consolidation in this world, Lara, because I think clients are going to get extremely clear in what they want to do because of all the expertise that they've got through the way, and they'll get into a mode of self execution, right? And I think the last piece that I would say is markets are going to go up and down, Lara. Now, tech can't change that, and neither can tech predict it. But what can tech do is create ease in process, ease in execution, and ease to get things done. So I think that's going to be a major disruption as the world goes, 10 years out in this space more so. But I think I'll come back to one point as we talk about disruption. Lara, I think like they say, oil is the new gold or data is the new gold. I also say time is gold. And what clients don't have, Lara, is time because they're spending time running their operating companies, making money and creating liquid cash flow. So consuming data, understanding data, hiring people to do that, it's not something that they want to spend their time on. They want somebody who they trust, who they can work with, who can come on. So even with this tech disruption, yes, there is going to be a lot of nimbleness and straight through processing that will come through. But in reality, what you're going to also see is clients will have less and less time. We can say tech will create more time. Clients will fill that time by doing things that will matter most for them, staying with their family, focusing on health, focusing on things that matter to them. Money does matter to them, but they would always need somebody independent to tell them how and what and where this should be placed. So, a lot of disruption, but I think that element of time is going to be the critical one for clients more so. And how do you really create that time and intuitively and simply explain to them what they need to do is going to be the real differentiator for the future.
And when you're speaking about these evolving client needs, and particularly for these high net worth individuals, how is InvestGate positioning itself to really fulfill and exceed those types of expectations?
So, Lara, like I said, products are commoditized. Everyone is offering the same product suite across the board. So I don't think our focus is product because there is enough and more to have. And you would see more banks creating different products and very, very innovative products that are coming through. I think it's beyond products. I think it's more around solutioning, right? So I think if you really think about it, the InvestGate, I said to you that we had three broad gaps that we identified. And we said we are not going in for differentiation, but our job is to create distinction in the way we operate. What we've noticed as well, Lara, that most banks are not targeting a certain sweet spot of the client pool. These are clients who are self-employed, salaried professionals who've made AUMs of $2 to $3 million and anywhere between $20 million. So that 5 to 20 or 3 to 20 block is not being serviced. And it's not being serviced because the high street bank is finding it extremely difficult to keep up, either through the solutions that they provide to the customer, the cost part of structuring that they need to really come up with and plan for, because everything is cookie cut, right? And the larger banks are saying, is that worth our while? Is that customer large enough? And we believe that's the sweet spot. We believe these customers need hand-holding. We believe these are the customers for the future, 10 years out. And we believe that's where we're going to play our part. We're going to be a fully integrated service platform. Like I said, it's going to be a wealth concierge. So it's not exclusively about asset allocation. It's about debt. It's about risk management. It's about how and what positioning we obtain 5 years out. Clients are simple. Clients don't mind bad markets. Clients mind bad timing. Clients mind bad surprises. So if you can plan, and that's what our ethos is going to be, plan and stick to the plan. Because sticking to the plan gives you a lot more leverage in the future, And our job is to prevent our clients from doing things that they will repent or regret 5 years out. So it's two ways, right? Manage risk and make sure that the decisions, even though the market's not that good or it's going through a little bit of turmoil and volatility, it's fine. But make sure that the client's completely aware and handhold that journey. So I think that's going to be the way we're going to play it, Lara. After speaking to a lot of clients from different jurisdictions, I firmly believe that's the play. It is handholding, it is trust, it is moving away from commoditized product and coming into a zone of, trying and building that trust and working with the client through that journey so that things are got right 5-10 years out. Yeah.
And when you speak about all of these types of disruptions in the market, whether it's AI, technology, digital assets, regulations, all of the uncertainty that you were just touching on, what shifts do you believe that business leaders really need to be paying attention to right now? You've touched on this human element and this hand-holding. Is there anything further from your perspective or anything different to what we've touched on so far that you would advise other leaders that are perhaps wanting to be attuned to these shifts?
No, I would say there are a couple, right, in my mind, and I'll really try and point out three to you. I think the tech and AI shift has already come through. You're seeing robo advisory, and I think it's going to intensify as things move through the cycle. And we spoke about what does 10 years out look like, and you could typically have robo advisors in the real sense advising clients sitting across the table. So I think that's one place to look out for. How do you really create an integrated platform enabled by technology? You have to make the investment. It hurts when you're starting off, but I think it pays off because the ROI is in the long run. So I think that's a very important one. I think regulation and the regulatory landscape, Laura, I think that's changing and evolving extremely quickly. Like we said, the Middle East, more so the UAE, is becoming a hub for clients. People are all coming here. It's cross border. How do you manage cross border risk? How do you really think about governance? And how do you work closely with the regulators where you want to really operate, right? I think that's a very, very important one. And I think when we speak about wealth and wealth management, most conclusively, the view is how much return did you make? And I think the shift is coming, very, very frankly, it's going to how much risk have you mitigated? Because it's more about risk mitigation for the future. And I think that's the third point that I would say, Lara. If the view could change from primarily just how much return, because return will be made. Markets are good, returns come. Markets are bad, you manage risk. And there is a volatile world ahead of us. And how do you really manage risk through portfolios so that customers don't get bad surprises is another element that I would think will require a lot of focus and a lot of energy by advisors such as us.
And for a leader who's listening to this that perhaps hasn't had as much exposure in leading through these volatile markets, what advice would you give them to help them navigate that more confidently?
I'm not that old. I've seen a little bit of a little bit, and I've seen them quite hard, right? And through the cycle, I've seen quite a bit of pain, in the markets. You could call it the global equity markets. You could call it the real estate markets in certain regions, and so on and so forth. So I think a couple of things, when you're in it, you're worried and you're stressed. I think, look, taking the bad news and going to clients it's important. Because if you try to sugarcoat or hide when things are not going very well, guess what? When things come back, no one's going to be standing for you. And that's the reality. So have the courage, stand out there and be able to give that bad news and be able to accept that enough risk mitigation didn't really come through the portfolio because we were only banking the upside, so to say, right? I think that's very important. I think stay calm. I think it's a cliche, but I mean, it's important. You got to stay calm because if you're not calm, you're not going to be able to relay the message or really think through opportunities that will help navigate to land at a better place. So I think being calm is very, very important. Calm and resilient. And I think lastly, things will go up and things will go down. And that's exactly like the market. And that's exactly like our lives. Don't stress too much about it. It has to go up. What comes up goes down, and what goes down goes up. Just have the patience and the resilience to ride it, and it'll all be good. And I don't mean it as a cliche, and I don't mean it as a very, very, motherhood and apple pie statement, but I genuinely have lived through it. And initially, I maybe didn't have that ability, but I built it and I trained myself, and it's worked. So I would say that, yeah.
I'm curious to know, how did you cultivate that calm and resilience? Because this seems to be quite a big theme. You were touching on resilience at the earlier piece of our conversation. For a leader who's listening that wants to cultivate that resilience, wants to be able to be the calm amongst the storm, how did you cultivate that skill or that muscle, if you will?
This is going to be a tough one for me to answer, but I'm going to still answer it, right? It's like asking a golfer, how did you become a scratch golfer? And I think intuitively the answer is always going to be, I practiced and I stayed at the golf course for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. I hit 500 balls a day, and I went to the gym every day. So I think that element of discipline really needs to be inculcated. I don't think very few would be able to do it off the cuff. I think most, including myself, have actually inculcated that discipline where focusing on how to stay calm. Now, there are a lot of things you can do where I come from. I come from India, Lara. And breathing in yoga is a very big thing. Now, initially I would think, is it really going to help? But I think simple stuff like that, just spending time with yourself and maybe 20 minutes a day, just meditating, it brings a lot of calm, it brings a lot of peace. And I think what it also brings is a lot of clarity. So once you have calm and peace and clarity, guess what? It's a winning combo, right? That you're going to weather the storm, right? And then the other things that people do, go sit with your friends, have a good time, go to the gym. I mean, those are things that I have done, play some sport, but really in the rut of life, in the rigor of life, when things like this happen, it's out of discipline that you would get to the end game, as opposed to in the moment trying to be able to hoodwink it and trying to get out of it. I think it's more around discipline, and some of this could potentially help. It's helped me, so I guess it could potentially help. Yeah.
I would love to leave some practical insights for our audience. If listeners were to walk away with 3 key takeaways from this conversation, what do you hope that they would be?
The 3 that the listener should really go out with on this one is: solve real problems. Don't think that there is a problem. Solve the real ones. And those real problems can only be solved by talking to people and listening. A lot of us typically think there is a problem, and we start building to solving something which may not be a problem at all. So solve real problems. I think that's very, very important. I think the other thing that I believe that listeners would, work on yourself and back yourself, because there is going to be a lot of people who are going to tell you it's not like this and it's not like that and it could go this way and it could go that way. I think backing yourself is extremely, extremely important. And when the chips are down, right? More so then. And I think the third thing, just have fun. Have fun. It's chaotic. The world's chaotic. Everyone's going through their own stresses. Just have fun. And I think if you can do these 3 things, it's a better outcome for yourself personally, for your well being. And hopefully, when you're doing that, you'll do good things for people who matter the most to you, or your clients, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So, the next question I wanted to ask you is, how does your own experience building teams, guiding clients, managing uncertainty, how does that connect to the broader business challenges that leaders face today?
If you think about it, when you're sitting as a leader, you're typically trying to, create a team or an ecosystem that can carry the vision and then go on with it. And I think that's the most important thing. You're as good as your weakest link. For InvestGate, that's exactly what we've really focused on, and we've tried to build that. So as we go through launch, you would see the kind of advisory board that we set for ourselves, the kind of people, 100 years plus of experience, cross-jurisdictional. That by itself brings a lot of gravitas and energy and thought process of how to really solve. So I think that's very, very important. The team, the people is very, very important. I think the second thing in these challenges, you would notice it's extremely important to be able, with the team that you have, right, to be able to draw the map. Because a lot of people have the strategy map in order, but the execution map is what is critical. Because you can have all the strategy in the world, it looks great on paper, everyone really bites, and everyone thinks it's the best. But the slip between the cup and the lip is between creating the strategy and executing the strategy. And I think the other piece for InvestGate is we have leaders who've run businesses in these jurisdictions. So they've actually seen these challenges live, and dealt with them live and helped customers and so on and so forth. So I think that's a very, very important one, because strategy is all great. And there is a saying, it's execution eats strategy for breakfast. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the real one, because going
Yeah.
from paper into execution is critical, and it's the toughest thing to do. So how do you really get that angle going? I think the third angle, which is very, very important as well, as you're building, you get caught up with scale, and you get caught up with revenue, and you get caught up with how much more can you do for your customers. I think the whole element around your infrastructure, risk, security for clients, I think that's a very, very important element. It doesn't feature extremely hard when people talk, but I think that risk management element, in terms of how do you risk manage and risk free portfolios, in how do you risk manage your business, how do you make sure you have a right operating rhythm and governance structure in place that can support growth, aid growth, right? Because expansion without that infrastructure is a recipe for disaster. So I think the team, it starts there, and then everything else will percolate and come into place. But these are the main things that you really need to be mindful of as you really build and create. And for us at InvestGate, this has been our guiding principle. And I keep repeating myself, Laura, it's differentiation is not something we want to do. We want to be distinct. We're not for everybody. We're not one size fits all. We have a niche, we have a sweet spot, and that's the client pool we want to play. We want to bring an integrated solution set with a risk management framework that can help clients not just on wealth management, but on debt advisory, corporate structuring, corporate governance, the whole suite, right? So I think that's how we are trying to build it. I think there is merit. It's tough. It's tougher, but I think there is a lot of merit in going that way, because I think for the future, these will be elements that will be extremely, extremely important.
And lastly, on this theme, when you look at younger leaders or entrepreneurs that are entering the finance world, what advice do you find yourself repeating most often?
This is the conundrum. After leaving the institution and the professional world, for me personally, I've only been learning from these youngsters, because they have such a different take or how things need to be done. In the last 6 months since I've left the professional world, I have been unlearning what I have learned to learn from these youngsters. How can you really take things through the finish line? Extremely dynamic, extremely smart. I just feel they want to take on a lot more than they can really execute to. So my word of caution to every youngster is stay disciplined, pick a few wins and go after them, because the minute you start doing 20 things, you're not going to be good at any. But if you
Mm.
pick 3, there is a great possibility and probability that you'd be good at maybe 2 out of those 3. And that's a great start.
There's such a power to making the main thing, particularly when there is so much noise and distraction, as you touched on earlier. We end all of our interviews here at CEO Behind the Scenes with the same 2 signature questions. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, what is one thing you've changed your mind about recently, and why?
One thing I've changed my mind about recently, I've changed my mind about what I believed was right might not have always been right. And I've changed my mind to believe that real and true problems need to be solved, as opposed to following the herd and trying to do the same thing that everyone's doing. That's been a great revelation. It's been 6, 8 months, and that's what I'm doing, and it's great.
That's fantastic. And the second question is, what's one belief you haven't changed your mind about? Something that continues to anchor the way you lead and live.
Think for me, Lara, I touched upon it a little earlier. I think it's the true north. I think it's doing the right thing and doing it right when nobody's looking, taking the tougher road. And I've done that all my life. And I think that's very key to me and very, very personal to me.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Kunal, I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your perspective and for really giving us a look inside the future that you're building at InvestGate Private Wealth. Were there any final words or any final messages that you wanted to leave our audience with before we wrap up today?
No, I think firstly, Ra, thank you so much. It's been engaging and lovely to be talking to you. It's a complete honor. Thank you so much for having me here. I think the last thing that I'll say is stay the course and execute hard and believe in yourself and go for it. That's all I would say.
Well said. Thank you so much, Kunal. Thank you for this conversation. And to our audience, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review and share it with someone that would really benefit from Kunal's insights and wisdom that he has shared with us today. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on CEO Behind the Scenes.